All right, still fighting a cold, but I'm going to try and talk my way through it. This is the second presentation of Chapter 2, the Founding and the Constitution. In the first presentation, we talked about the reasons why the United States went, and why the colonies, I should say, sought independence from England, and how that was achieved to some extent. That's more of a history question than anything else. And then we talked about the original system of government, which, again, the overarching concern of the people that created the Articles of Confederation was to prevent repeating the sins of the past and creating too powerful a central government. They wanted to avoid that fate. And so they created the Articles of Confederation as a fairly loose confederation of sovereign states. And that began producing problems of its own that we'll talk about in this section. So the Articles of Confederation effectively was failing by around 1785-86. Again, following independence, the independent states had difficulty in conducting foreign affairs, and that led to fears of foreign manipulation. That was especially illustrated in the British Parliament's refusal to meet with John Adams, who was trying to act as ambassador for all 13 colonies. They basically said to Adams, we would prefer to engage in bilateral negotiations with each state. State power under the Articles prevented any kind of collective action on a lot of issues, and many of them related to taxation and the management of conflicts between and among the states, and those were really occurring. The Annapolis Convention of 1786 basically were comprised of people in the Continental Congress meeting in a separate place and saying, we need to do something. And so that led to calls for constitutional reforms. Two of the people who went to the Annapolis Convention, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, went to George Washington, who lent his name to these calls and basically created support for the Constitutional Convention. Another event that really kind of provoked and galvanized people's opinions about the need for a new government was Shays' Rebellion, which occurred in Massachusetts, and it was basically a tax insurrection because Massachusetts attempted to pass a law and said, you got to pay all your debts, you got to pay it in gold, or you forfeit all your property or your mortgages or whatever. That and the fact that Massachusetts really struggled to put down the rebellion and ultimately had to hire a mercenary army of other state militias really kind of galvanized the situation and basically said we're facing chaos if we don't improve our system of governance. And so that was really the overhang as the delegates went into Philadelphia to begin negotiating on a new government. One of the first things that happened, most of the convention delegates were in consensus that they needed a more effective system of government than the Articles of Confederation. James Madison came to the convention with a radical departure from the Articles in the Virginia Plan. It was a much more unitary system. It would have preserved the states, but it would have given the federal government a great deal more power. It really was very similar to kind of the parliamentary system that England had. A lot of people thought that was such a departure that it was dangerous. So they created an alternative in the New Jersey Plan, which would effectively have been the Articles of Confederation with some added powers. The Great Compromise was designed to basically, imagine a new, a middle ground between those two plans, and that basically led to the establishment of a bicameral legislature, which basically said we will expand the number of interests that can be brought to bear into the government, with the lower House of Representatives elected by the people, and the Senate as the upper chamber being selected by the state legislatures themselves. Slavery again kind of raised its head during the Constitutional Convention. Attitudes towards slavery were shifting during this period. The Revolutionary War generated another deep source of discomfort about slavery. A lot of the people who fought and died in the Revolutionary War were black soldiers, in many instances fighting for their freedom. Nevertheless, because so many Southern political elites and economic elites were deeply implicated in the slavery, in the institution of slavery, there were two effective compromises made. The 3/5 Compromise, which had the effect of increasing the representational power of the Southern states in the House of Representatives. And the extension of the slave trade until 1808. Remember, there's a 20-year advance. That basically that was an accommodation saying to slaveholders, you have 20 years to amass sufficient numbers of slaves to sustain your activities for some imagined period of time. That creates a reality, and that is that slavery was legal at the time of ratification of the Constitution. If you understand the idea of path dependence, decisions in the past structure, the way forward. The fact that the Constitution originally basically tolerated slavery and legalized it had profound effects that can be felt today. So who are Americans? When you look again at this, overall, free white people were about 80% of the population of the colonies. They were, of course, 100% of the delegates. Slave owners, they were about 83% of Americans were not slaveholders, but close to a third, over a third, 36% of the delegates were in fact slaveholders, and that's an important number. That over 1/3 were in fact slaveholders, and they exerted disproportionate influence at the convention. In terms of gender, again, it's a dramatic reality, which was that at that time women were 49% of the population, but received no representation at the convention. And then, of course, occupation. It's again not surprising. 74% of Americans were farmers, but only a little over a quarter of the delegates worked in farming. And so again, the Constitution, once ratified, created significant powers, but also limited power in significant ways. You're really dealing with two significant constitutional challenges. On the one hand, to create a government strong enough to promote commerce and protect private property, and on the other hand, to prevent the threat posed by tyranny of the majority. So principles like the separation of powers, checks and balances, and then later on the addition of a Bill of Rights were intended to promote this idea. I think I used the phrase earlier, the idea of ordered liberty, the maximum amount of personal freedom and autonomy that is consonant with also the idea of political order, of peace, because peace is a necessary condition for prosperity. And of course, prosperity is one of the main things driving the members of the Constitutional Convention and the founding generation in general. These were liberals, and liberalism was the ideology of capitalism as it was emerging in the world in this period of time. So this sort of gets us to the point, this middle point, where we've got a constitution. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other important constitutional features, the ideas of separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism, and then, of course, how you go about ratifying, how you go about amending the Constitution. We will deal with those issues in our next two presentations.